The bell above the bookshop door chimed with its small, familiar ring as the last customer of the evening stepped out into the rain. For a brief moment, the door remained open, letting in the cool, damp air that smelled of wet pavement and distant chimneys, and then the woman behind the counter watched as the man pulled his collar up around his neck and hurried toward the corner, his figure blurring behind the sheen of water on the glass. Street lamps along the narrow road cast halos on the slick asphalt, and the rain turned their light into tall, wavering columns that trembled and shimmered each time a car passed by. Inside, the little bookshop felt even more sheltered for that contrast, its air warm and still and faintly scented with paper, dust, and the ghost of ink. The woman listened as the bell's echo faded into the soft hum of the rain, and a quiet, beloved feeling settled over her. The change from business to private, from day to night, as gentle and certain as the closing of a well-worn cover over the last page of a story. Her name was Elise, though the customers rarely used it. Most simply called her Miss, or Dear, or You behind the counter, and she never minded. She was in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in an easy twist, and a cardigan that always seemed to carry a faint trace of the shop's scent, as if the paper and ink were slowly weaving themselves into the wool. For nearly a decade, she had opened and closed this small-town bookshop on the same schedule, 6 days a week, with Sundays reserved for laundry, simple cooking, and her own quiet reading. In the 1,970 seconds, the town outside was changing in small ways: new cars, louder radios, more color flickering behind curtains from the glow of televisions. But inside these walls, time moved at the pace of turning pages. Elise would have said that the world outside might hurry if it wished, but in here, everything could remain soft and slow. The shelves were lined from floor to ceiling with hardcovers and paperbacks whose spines showed the gentle wear of many hands. Some were gleaming and new, others faded and softened by years of being opened in lamplight or read under blankets, in kitchens, on porches, beside hospital beds, on trains. Every evening, when the last customer left, she felt as though the books themselves exhaled, grateful for the silence. Elise stepped around the counter and walked to the front door. The street beyond the glass was a quiet ribbon of dark, the rain falling in fine, silvery threads that sparkled when they crossed the path of a street lamp. She could see the faint, blurry outline of the grocer's shop sign down the road, and the glow from the cafe on the corner where a few late drinkers lingered in soft conversation. It comforted her to know they were there, like small lanterns in the night. While she stayed here in her own little pool of light, she reached up, fingers steady, and turned the wooden sign that hung in the window from open to closed, the hand-painted letters in pale blue, now facing inward. Then she drew the door gently toward her. The hinges gave a soft, familiar sigh, and as the latch met the frame, she turned the key. The lock closed with a quiet, precise click, not sharp but definite, a simple sound that nonetheless felt like the drawing of a circle of safety around the shop. Outside, the rain tapped and streaked the glass. Inside, there was only the soft rustle of her cardigan, the distant ticking of the old wall clock, and the soothing hush of so many sleeping pages. For a moment, she stood there, hand resting lightly on the doorframe, listening. The rain had its own rhythm, a steady, tender drumming that came from many directions at once: the roof, the awning, the street, the umbrellas of the few late passers-by. The sound wrapped around the building like a soft, gray shawl. Raindrops clung to the window pane, quivering in rows and clusters, some merging and slipping down in slow, delicate trails. The streetlights turned each droplet into a tiny bead of brightness, and the glass itself seemed to hold a blurry, shimmering reflection of the shelves behind her. She liked this time of evening most, when the outside world blurred into watercolor through the rain, and the inside became its own small universe. The bookshop was not large. A person could walk from the front door to the back room in less than a minute. But when the door was locked and the sign turned, it felt spacious in a different way, as if every shelf and shadow and narrow aisle had a secret life that belonged only to the quiet. She moved away from the door with a small, contented breath and made her way down the central aisle, her fingertips trailing lightly along the edges of the shelves. The books were arranged with care mysteries on one side, romances opposite, biographies and histories along the far wall, children's titles near the old braided rug where school children liked to sit on Saturday mornings. Elise knew where nearly everything lived. She could have found a title in the dark if she needed to, guided by the shape and height and feel of the shelves. As she passed, she noticed a slim paperback sitting slightly forward from its neighbors, no doubt left that way by the last customer as he considered and then returned it. She eased it back into place, aligning its spine with the others, and felt a simple, quiet satisfaction in this small act of order. Every night, she put the shop back into a kind of gentle harmony, so that when morning came and the bell chimed again, it would be ready to receive whatever stories the day might bring. At the end of the aisle, near the small table where she displayed new arrivals, Elise paused. A faint, crooked line of light lay across the floorboards, cast by the street lamp outside through a narrow gap in the curtain. Dust motes drifted lazily in its path, their movements slow and aimless, like tiny floating seeds. She watched them for a moment, feeling a tranquil heaviness in her limbs, that pleasant tiredness that comes after a full day of work that has demanded no harshness, only patience and care. She could still hear echoes of the day, the laughter of two schoolgirls who had discovered a book of fairy tales with glowing illustrations, the soft thanks of an elderly man who came every Thursday for a new mystery, the uncertain voice of a young woman asking for something hopeful to read. But they were fading now, absorbed into the gentle hush that filled the shop. The present moment was all rain, paper, and lamplight. She returned to the counter and reached under it for the soft cloth she kept there for evening tidying. The counter itself was worn smooth in front of the register, where countless hands had rested coins and bills over the years. The wood polished by touch and time, she began to wipe it down in slow, circular motions, not because it was especially dusty, but because the motion soothed her. On the shelf beneath, tucked between a stack of paper bags and some old catalogs, lay a notebook in which she kept lists orders to place, titles customers had asked after, small ideas for window displays. But she did not open it now. Tonight felt like a night for fewer plans, for letting the rain do most of the speaking. Above her, the pendant lamp with its mellow glass shade spread a circle of soft light. Beyond that circle, the corners of the shop receded into kind, unthreatening shadows, the sort that invited dreaming rather than fear. As she set the cloth aside, Elise's gaze drifted toward a nearby shelf where the more weathered books lived, those that had been with the shop since long before she took it over. Their covers were a little faded, their pages a little yellowed at the edges, but they had a certain dignity, like old friends who had seen many seasons and remained steadfast. A faint irregularity caught her eye, a slip of something pale, just visible between the pages of a thick novel whose spine leaned slightly to one side. The sight stirred her curiosity, but it was a mild, unhurried curiosity, the kind that felt right for a rainy evening. She would go to it soon, in good time. For now, she stood there in the center of her little kingdom, listening to rain on the windows and on the roof, smelling the soft, deep scent of paper, and feeling the warm assurance that, in this moment, everything was exactly as it needed to be. In the stillness, it seemed to Elise that the bookshop itself was breathing quietly, a living thing made of shelves and bindings, and the stories of everyone who had ever stepped inside. The rain outside was its lullaby. The books were its dreams. She smoothed a strand of hair back behind her ear and let her shoulders relax, the day's small tensions dissolving into the gentle rhythm of the night. There would be time now to straighten the shelves, to follow the little thread of mystery suggested by that slip of paper, to travel in memory through the hands and hearts that had passed through this place. For the moment, she simply allowed herself to stand, surrounded by walls of stories and the soft, silver murmur of the rain, wrapped in a deep, quiet sense of being at home. When you are ready, you may ask for part 2, and the night in the bookshop will continue to unfold. The echo of the lock's soft click still seemed to hang in the air, like a note at the end of a gentle song, as Elise turned away from the door and let her eyes travel slowly over the familiar lines of the shop. With the outside world now firmly, kindly held beyond the glass, the room felt smaller in the warmest way, as if it were folding itself around her in a quiet embrace. The sign in the window, now showing its closed side to the empty street, looked like a small promise that nothing more would be demanded of her tonight. There would be no more hurried questions, no more rustle of coats, no more small coins counted out with anxious fingers. Only the even breath of the rain, the steady tick of the clock, and the peaceful company of the shelves awaited her. The thought soothed her as surely as a soft blanket pulled up over tired shoulders. She began her slow circuit of the shop, the one she traced almost every evening, though never in exactly the same way. It was a ritual that had grown out of habit and affection rather than strict necessity, but Elise cherished it all the same. She started near the door, where a narrow table held a modest display of paperbacks, their covers turned outward to catch the eye of anyone passing by. Now, with no eyes to catch, they seemed to rest. She touched each one lightly, straightening a few that had tipped forward, nudging others so that their edges aligned in a neat, calm row. A romance with a sun-faded spine leaned wearily against a newer mystery. She gently separated them and gave each its own little space to breathe. Beneath her hand, the covers were smooth or slightly rough, glossy or matte, and each texture felt known, almost intimate, as if she had been entrusted with their keeping. Outside, the rain grew steadier, its voice deepening into a more continuous murmur. The glass panes in the front windows trembled very slightly with the constant touch of water, and the sound spread through the shop like a soft, watery hum. It was not a storm that rattled or shouted. It was the kind of rain that seemed content to fall for hours in a peaceful, unhurried way, washing the streets and roofs, glossing every surface with a thin, silver sheen. The occasional car passed, tires hissing on the wet road, but even that sound was softened, absorbed by the curtain of rain and the solid comfort of the book-lined walls. Elise could imagine the town folding in on itself for the night. Curtains drawn, lamps switched off, breakfasts prepared and laid out for the morning, radios turned down to a sleepy murmur. Here in the shop, the sense of being sheltered felt complete, as though the rain and the walls had conspired together to keep her safe. She moved along the nearest aisle, where the fiction shelves ran in long, well-stocked lines. Her hand drifted over the spines, pausing now and then to nudge one back into place or to straighten a book that leaned too heavily against its neighbor. There was a certain balance she liked, a quiet harmony in how the books stood side by side, neither too regimented nor too disorderly, like guests at a comfortable gathering. Occasionally, a volume jutted out, left that way by a customer who had considered and then declined it, and she would slide it back into the row with a slow, satisfying motion, the gentle rasp of paper and cardboard, a tiny, soothing sound. The faint scent of aging paper rose up whenever she did this, mingling with the subtler traces of binding glue and ink, and she breathed it in as one might breathe in the smell of rain or earth. To her, it was the scent of time made gentle and kind. As she walked, she let her thoughts drift in easy, quiet currents, She remembered the young man who had stood in this very aisle earlier in the day, frowning thoughtfully at two different novels, unable to decide between them. He wore a denim jacket dampened by an earlier shower and had apologized for dripping on the floor, as if the rain were his fault. In the end, he had chosen the slimmer of the two books, perhaps for the simple comfort of knowing he would finish it sooner. And Elise had wrapped it in brown paper for him, enjoying the crackle and fold of the wrapping as much as he seemed to enjoy receiving it. She imagined him now, somewhere under this same stretch of gray sky, leaning close to a lamp, the rain whispering at his window while he turned the first pages. That image pleased her. The thought of stories traveling out from this quiet place into the private, sheltered corners of other people's lives. Reaching the middle of the shop, she stopped before the section where the older novels lived, the ones whose covers no longer matched the fashions of the moment, but whose stories had not dimmed. The spines here showed a uniform softness, their colors dulled to gentle browns, greens, and blues, as if time had stroked them with a faded brush. It was among these that something pale caught her attention. A narrow sliver of paper, just visible where it protruded from the top edge of a thick volume. The book itself was a sturdy hardcover from the early 50s, its cloth binding worn smooth at the corners, its title stamped in gold that had thinned over the years. Elise felt a small stir of curiosity, like a leaf turning over in a light breeze. Forgotten paper tucked into old books was not uncommon, but each one felt like a tiny secret left behind by some previous reader, a quiet echo waiting to be heard. She slid the book from its place with both hands, mindful of the way its weight pulled against the shelf. The neighboring volumes shifted minutely with a soft, collective sigh. Holding the book against her chest for a moment, she closed her eyes and listened to the rain, letting the sound settle her deeper into the calm of the evening. When she opened her eyes again, she carried the book a few steps to a small table at the end of the aisle, where a shaded lamp cast a gentle circle of light. She set the heavy volume down, the dull thud of it on the wood sounding solid and reassuring, then drew out the slip of paper that had caught her eye. It came free with only the faintest whisper, as if reluctant to leave its long hiding place. The note was no larger than her palm. The paper yellowed to a soft cream and curled slightly at the corners. Along one edge, the fibers had frayed into a feathery line, suggesting it had been torn from a larger sheet long ago. Elise turned it over carefully between her fingers, feeling the thinness of it, the fragile resilience that had allowed it to endure years pressed between printed pages. There, on one side, she saw handwriting, small, neat letters written in dark ink that had faded only a little. The sight of those letters, the intimacy of a hand long absent still speaking in small curves and strokes, gave her a quiet, almost reverent feeling. She did not read the note at once. Instead, she stood with it for a moment, listening to the rain tap gently at the windows, feeling the hush of the shop around her, as if the room itself were pausing to see what she would discover. Slowly, she smoothed the paper against the tabletop and leaned closer. The lamp above her, with its warm, frosted shade, cast a soft light that made the ink shine faintly. The first line of the note was simple, but it carried a tenderness that brushed against her heart in an unexpectedly gentle way. She could sense, even before taking in every word, that it had been written with care, perhaps folded and placed in this book as a quiet gift to someone, or as a small anchor to a particular moment in time. The edges of the note curled upward again, as if in a small, sleepy stretch, and Elise placed her fingertips near them to ease it flat, treating it with the same respect she might give a delicate pressed flower. Around her, the shop remained wrapped in its calm. The rain continued its peaceful patter, the world outside reduced to shifting silver shapes beyond the misted glass. The smell of paper and cloth and old glue rose in gentle waves from the shelves, mingling with the faintest trace of the afternoon's black tea. Elise felt perfectly enclosed, perfectly safe, as though she stood at the heart of a quiet circle that the night would not disturb. With the locked door behind her and the soft murmur of the storm outside, she and the little note seemed to exist in a pocket of time that was almost still. She drew a slow breath, ready at last to take in the words left here long ago. And in that small act of attention, the evening's gentle mystery truly began. For a long, unmeasured moment, Elise stood with the little note beneath the lamplight, letting its presence settle gently into her thoughts, like a small pebble sinking slowly to the bottom of a clear pool. She read the words once, then again, quietly, her lips moving just enough to shape the lines in silence. They were simple, no names, no dates, only a few softly earnest sentences that spoke of gratitude for a shared book, for an afternoon spent reading together by a window, for the way a certain story had made two people feel a little less alone. Whoever had written it had folded all of that tenderness into a handful of unassuming lines and then left them here, between these pages, for someone else to find, or perhaps for no one at all. Elise did not feel compelled to know more. It was enough for her, on this rainy night, to feel that she was holding a small, forgotten kindness, preserved in paper and ink. She folded the note along its original crease, smoothing it gently with her thumb, and slid it back into the exact place where it had rested, letting the thick book close over it with a soft, cushioned thump. The sound felt like a sigh of agreement, as if the book approved of being allowed to keep its secret. For a moment, she rested her hand on the cover, feeling the faint texture of the cloth beneath her fingers, and then she lifted the volume and returned it to its home on the shelf, the gap it had left closed around it, other spines leaning in with the quiet familiarity of close neighbors. Elise stepped back and glanced toward the front of the shop, where the windows glowed dimly in the twilight. The rain outside had thickened, the glass now streaked with slow-moving rivers of water that bent the light into wavering bands, as if the street were a world viewed through sleep. She walked toward the front, drawn by the pale, changing patterns on the panes. As she approached, the smell of damp air, faint but present, reached her each time the doorframe creaked lightly and let in the slightest draft. She did not mind. The cool whisper from outside made the warmth inside feel deeper, more complete. The display table near the window held a neat arrangement of cloth-bound classics and modern paperbacks, their covers catching what little light came in from the street. She touched the corner of one dust jacket, felt the smoothness under her fingertips, and then turned her attention to the curtain that hung at one side. Gently, she drew it back just enough to peer out. The town looked softer in the rain, edges blurred, colors subdued to gentle grays and muted golds. The pavement shone like dark glass, reflecting the street lamps and the faint, hazy glow from distant windows. Somewhere further down, a tree in front of a neighboring building moved in the wind, its wet leaves glimmering whenever they turned toward the light. The branches swayed with a slow, patient rhythm, and Elise imagined the raindrops clasped at their tips like tiny, clear beads, each one a small, cool world of its own. The sky above was mostly cloud, deep and smooth, yet here and there the thinning edges hinted at a lighter, silvery presence beyond. She knew that sooner or later, as the night grew older, a break would appear, and perhaps a sliver of moon would look down, soft and pale, on the rooftops and chimneys. Letting the curtain fall back into place, Elise turned once more to the rows of books. The overhead lights seemed suddenly too bright for such a gentle evening, their white glare cutting across the softer tones of wood and paper. On impulse, she reached for the switches behind the counter and flicked them off, leaving only the small lamps glowing. The shaded one on the side table, the old brass lamp on the counter, and a narrow, amber bulb near the back that cast a modest, golden haze over the storage doorway. In the absence of the bright lights, the shop changed character subtly, Shadows grew deeper along the floor, stretching out in calm, unhurried shapes. The shelves stood like friendly silhouettes, lined with quiet knowledge. The pockets of lamplight made islands of warmth, inviting her to move slowly from one to the next. She crossed to a corner where another small table stood, this one with a lamp, whose shade was painted with faint flowers, pale blue and white blossoms that seemed to float on a background of cream. When she turned it on, the blossoms glowed softly, and the light beneath spread over the nearest shelves in a gentle pool. Book spines, once flat in the overhead glare, now gleamed and darkened in delicate patterns, some letters catching the light while others sank into shadow. Elise felt the change in the air. It was as if the shop had lowered its voice, choosing a sleepier, more intimate tone. The rain light outside, the lamplight inside, and the deep, quiet smell of paper all joined together in a single, peaceful mood. This was the moment each evening when she truly began her slow, careful tending of the shelves. Starting at one end of the nearest row, she pulled out a volume here and there, checking for dust or stray marks, straightening the edges of worn dust jackets. Some books opened with a faint resistance, their bindings creaking gently like old wooden doors, and she would let them breathe for a moment, holding them in both hands as the scent of paper rose softly to meet her. Each book had its own slight variance of aroma, some sharper, tinged with the crispness of newer paper and fresher ink, others mellow and almost sweet, like dried leaves and faint spices. The older titles carried with them the smell of the rooms in which they had been read. Faint memories of pipe smoke, soap, winter wool, summer open windows. Elise could not name those scents directly, but she felt them, subtle and familiar, as if the stories themselves exhaled the air of past decades. As she turned the pages, she did so slowly, savoring the quiet rustle and the way each leaf fell back into place with such gentle obedience. The edges brushed lightly against one another, a soft, steady sound that mingled with the rain's murmur in a natural harmony. She did not read the text. This was not the time for losing herself in plots and characters, but now and then, a sentence at the top of a page would catch her eye, a stray phrase that seemed to shine for no clear reason. She would let her gaze rest on it briefly and then close the book with a small, satisfied tap, feeling as though she had exchanged a nod with an old acquaintance. Here and there, between chapters or near the end papers, she found more evidence of former readers. A narrow strip of an old receipt, folded twice, marked a place in a novel she knew had been popular 10 years earlier. She unfolded the paper, noticing the date, the careful numbers, the name of another shop in town that no longer existed. The ink had softened to a pale gray, but the alignment of the figures, the printed logo at the top, all spoke of an afternoon long past when someone had tucked this slip into their book, perhaps absent-mindedly, perhaps intending to return to the page, and never quite doing so. Elise smiled, folded it again, and slid it back, letting it remain as a quiet thread binding that reader to the shelf. In another book, a small, pressed flower rested near the center, held between 2 pages of a poetry collection. Its petals, once blue, had faded to a tender, smoky shade, and its slender stem was as fragile as glass. When she lifted it with careful fingers, it gave off no scent, but she imagined the garden or roadside where it had once grown, the sun and wind that had touched it before someone chose it and laid it here. The poem on the facing page spoke of spring rain and distant hills. The pairing felt deliberate, as if the unknown reader had wished to trap a bit of the season itself inside the book. Elise returned the flower to its place and closed the cover gently, as though tucking it into bed. As she moved slowly from section to section, the rhythm of her work and the sound of the rain blended into a steady, comforting pattern. Turn a book, feel the texture of the board or paper, open the cover and breathe in the scent. Glimpse a word or line, close it again, straighten it on the shelf, take the next one. The repetition was soothing, and the variations an unexpected note. A forgotten ticket, a faded bookmark with curled ribbon added small, pleasant surprises without disturbing the calm. Outside, the rain slid down the windows in long, gleaming trails, each droplet catching what little light there was and turning it silver. Occasionally, a gust of wind would press against the glass, and the branches of the distant tree would sway more vigorously, leaves trembling and scattering drops like tiny stars shaken from their branches. In the far corner, near the modest section of travel books and old atlases, Elise paused and looked back down the length of the shop. From here, with the lamps low and the shelves standing quiet and steady, the space felt elongated, a narrow, golden tunnel lined with stories and secrets. The rain light from the front windows and the lamplight from within met and mingled, creating soft, shifting reflections on the varnished floor. It reminded her of the way moonlight sometimes fell across a river. Silver on the surface, dark and deep beneath. She imagined the shelves as banks of that river, the books as smooth stones beneath the water, waiting to be picked up, weighed in the hand, turned over, and admired. She wrapped her arms lightly around herself, not from cold, but from a gentle satisfaction. Every page she had turned, every spine she had straightened, every small relic she had found and honored in its place, made the shop feel more fully itself, tidy but not stiff, orderly but warmly human. The rain continued its soft performance on the roof and windows, and the air within remained still and fragrant, touched only by her slow movements. In this quiet hour, among these shelves of paper and rainlight, Elise felt as though she were watching over a room full of sleeping friends, each one holding dreams ready to be woken when morning came. As Elise stood in the quiet glow of the lamps, watching the gentle currents of light and shadow drift across the shelves, there came a small, almost shy flicker from the bulb above the counter. It was not dramatic, a brief dimming, a soft hesitation of light, as if the electricity itself were growing drowsy with the hour. But it drew her eyes upward. For an instant, the room seemed to inhale, the corners darkening, the spines losing their soft sheen. And then the light steadied again. The rain's murmur filled the pause that followed, and Elise felt a slow, easy thought move through her. This was a night that wanted softer light, something closer to the warmth of candle flame than the thin, uncertain beam of an aging bulb. She turned toward the counter with the comfortable decision already formed, as natural as turning a page. Behind the register, on a lower shelf, where she kept the things she rarely needed yet liked to have close by, stood a small tin box with a hinged lid. The metal was worn to a mellow dullness, and faint flowers, once cheerful and bright, were now only gentle outlines. Elise drew it out and opened it with a soft little click, releasing the faint scent of old wax and rose-scented matches. Inside lay a neat row of stubby candles, cream-colored and simple, along with a few taller ones that had been cut down when they burned low, their sides marked with the dripped traces of previous evenings. For years, the candles had been a kind of quiet backup for stormy nights when power lines threatened to fail. But in the last few seasons, she had begun to light them simply for their company, finding comfort in their steady, living glow. She carried the box to the central table and set it down with care, then moved from lamp to lamp, turning each switch until the electric light withdrew. The shop deepened into a hushed, velvety dimness, the windows now gray lozenges of rain-lit glass, the shelves dark, gentle shapes. The ticking of the wall clock became clearer. The patter of the rain, freed from the hiss of the bulbs, seemed to swell and stretch, filling the room like a soft, steady song. Elise struck the first match against the side of the little box. It flared with a small, bright sigh, a brief spark that reflected in the nearby window like a tiny star. She cupped her hand around the newborn flame, and its warmth touched her palm as she lowered it to the first candle waiting in its brass holder. The wick caught, darkened, then bloomed into a calm, golden flame. It did not rush or sputter. It rose smoothly, as if it had been half awake the whole time. She lit the second candle from the first, and then a third from the second, until a ring of gentle flames glowed on the central table, their light breathing in quiet, rhythmic sway. The shadows they cast were soft and slow, slipping along the spines of the nearest books, reaching into corners and folding back. Each flicker painted new lines along the ceiling and floor, turning the shop into a tender landscape of light and dark, where nothing was sharp and all edges melted into dusk. Elise felt her shoulders relax further, as if the candles had dimmed the day's last demands along with the electric glare. She took one of the brass holders to the counter, placing it near the register so that its circle of light bathed the wooden surface. Another candle she set on the small table with the floral shaded lamp, now dark, so that the painted blossoms on the shade received their own private glow, their pale petals becoming faint shadows instead of colors. A third she placed near the rear of the shop, on a narrow shelf by the doorway to the back room, where its flame would keep the darkness from gathering too heavily. When she stepped back and let her eyes adjust, she saw that the bookshop had transformed into something both familiar and more dreamlike. The same shelves, the same tables, the same windows hung with rain, yet everything softened as though the night had drawn a delicate veil over it all. With the candles burning in their quiet, faithful way, Elise moved to the small counter where she kept her kettle and teapot. The tin kettle, round and slightly dented, waited on a single burner hot plate beneath an old poster advertising tea from some far-off place. The colors faded to gentle browns and greens. She filled it from a glass bottle, listening to the soft rush of water and the faint clink as droplets struck the metal sides. When she set the kettle on the burner and turned the knob, a low hum began, steady and soothing, adding its subtle tone to the rain's ongoing music. The candle near the counter flickered as if in greeting, and she smiled at the way its light shone dimly on the curved body of the kettle, sketching a small, moving halo along its rounded edge. While she waited for the water to heat, she leaned her hip against the counter and let her gaze wander over the room. The shelves nearest the candles seemed to stand closer to her, their titles just legible in the warm light, while those further away receded into a comfortable dimness, their lettering melted into soft bands of shadow. There was something deeply peaceful in knowing that each of those darkened spines hid a world of words, slumbering for now, ready to wake when chosen. The candle flames moved in quiet conversation with the rain's reflections on the window panes. Each droplet on the glass caught a fragment of the candlelight as it slid downward, so that for an instant a bead of water would glow with a tiny, golden heart before rejoining the wet, silver streaks below. The kettle began to murmur more insistently, a low, rising whisper that told of water nearing its gentle boil. The sound was not abrupt, but gradual, like someone clearing their throat politely before speaking. Elise reached for her favorite teapot, a round ceramic one in soft gray blue with a tiny chip on the rim of its lid. She measured a spoonful of loose leaves into it, their dry rustle a subtle echo of turning pages, and when the kettle finally released a wispy sigh of steam, she poured the hot water slowly, watching as the surface of the liquid shimmered and darkened. The scent of tea rose in a delicate wave, warm, comforting, faintly floral. It mingled with the waxy whisper of the candles and the deep, paper-laden air, creating a fragrance that was entirely of this night, in this place. Carrying the teapot and a single cup, she returned to the small side table where she had first discovered the hidden note. The thick novel still stood there, its secret folded back between its pages, its presence now part of the room's quiet story. She set the cup down, poured the tea in a slow amber ribbon, and watched the steam uncurl into the candlelight. The flame nearest her bent slightly toward the rising warmth, then straightened again, its glow steady. For a while, she did nothing at all but stand and sip, letting the heat move through her, feeling it spread gently along her fingers and into her chest, where a calm heaviness began to settle. The rain reached a new rhythm, a soft, even drumming that seemed to rest on the roof as much as it fell. When the cup was half empty, she set it aside and picked up one of the books from the stack that had accumulated earlier on the table, a gathering of volumes she intended to tidy back to their proper places. The candle's light fell across its cover, turning the colors mellow, the title a faint gleam of gold. She opened it to the middle, and the pages caught the light in a way the electric bulbs never managed. The paper itself seemed to glow softly, each page a pale, luminous field brushed with lines of dark words. Where the candlelight touched the edges, they took on a silvery sheen, as if dusted with fine frost or the faintest trace of moonlight. The ink did not shout. It rested, calm and patient, and Elise felt her eyes move over the lines without urgency. She did not mean to read, yet a sentence drew her, and she let it. The characters on the page were strangers, and yet the cadence of the prose, the gentle unfolding of a scene by a river at dusk, matched the mood of the night so perfectly that for a few moments she allowed herself to drift along with it. The candle flame trembled, then steadied again. The rain's soft song pressed closer around the building, as though the whole town were leaning in to listen. When she closed the book, the faint warmth from the candle had touched the paper enough that it felt subtly different under her fingertips, no longer cool, but gently warmed, as if the story itself had been sitting by the fire. Book by book, she moved through the small stack, opening each one briefly, letting the candlelight skim the margins, watching how the pages shone with a soft, silver brightness at their edges. In one, she found a tiny corner of newspaper. In another, a ticket from a long-ago journey, the print nearly worn away. She did not disturb these small anchors of memory. She simply acknowledged them and folded the covers closed again, returning each book to its place on the shelf with a sense of rightness. The act felt less like tidying and more like setting small boats gently back into their harbors after a calm night on the water. When at last the stack had vanished and her cup was empty, Elise stood in the center of the shop once more, turning slowly to take it all in. The candles pacing their gentle light and shadow along the shelves, the long, silver trails of rain outside, the faint ticking of the clock, the deep, restful smell of paper and tea. The bookshop no longer felt merely like a room in a building. It felt like a living, dreaming creature, drowsy and kind, settling into its own sleep. The flames burned steadily, their light round and soft, and every page within reach gleamed faintly at the edges, as though brushed by something silver and peaceful. Wrapped in that glow, with the storm humming quietly just beyond the glass, Elise felt as safe and sheltered as if the whole world had turned itself into a quiet book just for her, closing gently around her for the night. The candles burned with a steady patience, their small, golden flames mirrored in the darkening windows, where the rain continued its gentle descent in silver threads. In the softened light, the higher shelves rose into a kind of shadowed mystery, rows of books that the daytime rarely disturbed, simply because they were a little out of reach. Elise's gaze drifted upward toward them now, toward the tall case along the side wall, where older volumes and less requested titles waited, quiet and uncomplaining. She knew there were corners of the shop even she did not touch every day, small, elevated regions of dust and paper where time pooled and settled. On this softly humming night, with the storm wrapping the building in its peaceful embrace, the thought of exploring those higher shelves felt inviting rather than like a task. She wanted to see what the years had left there, what little traces of lives might be resting unseen above her line of sight. The wooden ladder stood in its usual place, leaned modestly against the end of the tall bookcase. It was a simple thing, its rungs worn smooth by decades of hands and shoes, the grain of the wood shining dully where it had been polished by use. Elise approached it with the same gentle respect she gave her books, placing one hand on the side rail and feeling the solid, familiar weight of it. When she lifted it and eased it along the track at the top of the shelf, it rolled with a muted, comforting sound, a whisper of wheels against metal that blended with the rain's soft drumming. She positioned it where the tallest section of the case rose toward the ceiling, where old hardcover novels and forgotten essay collections stood in thick, slightly dusty ranks, then set her foot on the first rung and climbed slowly, candlelight spilling in wavering patterns along the spines as she ascended. From the upper rungs, the shop looked different, like a small, sheltered valley viewed from a gentle hill. The tops of the shelves formed a dark wooden landscape, and the candle flames below seemed farther away. Small, golden pools along a quiet river of aisles. The sound of the rain was nearer up here, too. It tapped more distinctly on the roof, a soft, steady tapping that felt almost like fingers drumming in a slow, soothing rhythm. Elise reached the height she needed and paused, one hand resting on the ladder, the other brushing lightly along the higher row of books. The dust that rose in a faint, powdery drift carried with it the deep, rich scent of long closed pages. The spines here were older, their colors subdued to deep greens, browns, and navy blues, titles pressed in lettering that had worn thin. She could feel, in the quiet weight of these volumes, that many years had passed since some of them had been chosen, carried home, and opened by lamplight. As she moved one book aside to straighten another, something pale caught her eye in the shadowed gap behind the row. Not a single slip this time, but a faint, cluttered edge of papers, corners, folds, and ragged ends, all gathered in a narrow hollow where the backs of the books did not quite meet the wall. Elise leaned closer, the ladder creaking softly under her small shift in weight. Up here, the candlelight from below reached more faintly, but enough to show her that a little hoard of forgotten things had collected there. Over the years, perhaps customers had slid notes or letters into books only for them to fall backward and disappear behind the row. Or perhaps, during some long-ago rearrangement, loose papers had been tucked there in haste, meant to be sorted later and then simply overlooked. They might have lain undisturbed through seasons of rain and sun, while new stories came and went on the shelves below. Very gently, Elise slid two of the taller books aside, creating a narrow space through which her hand could reach. Her fingers found the first slip of paper and drew it toward her. It came free with a soft, sighing sound, bringing others with it in a small, cascading cluster. She gathered what she could, pinching the edges carefully so as not to tear any of the delicate corners. There were envelopes, some sealed, most open. There were folded sheets, a scrap of stiff card, the corner of something thicker, like a photograph or a postcard. She felt as though she were lifting a handful of leaves from a quiet forest floor, each one different, each carrying its own faint history. With care, she held them close and descended the ladder slowly, one rung at a time, until her feet returned to the firm, familiar wooden floor of the shop. The candles flickered slightly as she passed, welcoming her back into their gentle circle of light. She carried her small treasure to the reading table near the center of the room, where one of the candles burned steadily beside the still warm teapot. The flame spread a golden pool across the wood, and she laid the little bundle of papers within it, arranging them so that no edges curled too close to the flame. For a moment, she only looked at them, letting the sight settle into her. Each piece was marked by time in its own quiet way. The yellowing of the paper, the frayed edges, the faded ink, the faint, almost invisible fingerprints of whoever had touched them last. Outside, the rain shifted to a slightly lighter pattern, as though the clouds were taking a softer breath, and the sound on the windows became more like a gentle brushing than a steady drum. The shop felt even more enclosed and peaceful, a perfect shelter for unwinding these small paper secrets of the town. She began with the smallest piece, a folded strip torn from what had once been a larger, heavier sheet. Opening it carefully, she saw a brief list written in a tidy hand, the letters narrow and precise. It named 3 poems, each with its page number, and beneath them a single line, "For when the evenings feel longer than they are." Elise smiled at that, at the quiet suggestion tucked into such a modest scrap. She imagined someone, perhaps years ago, standing at this same table and writing those titles for a friend who needed the comfort of gentle words at the end of tired days. Perhaps the list had been used as a bookmark and later lost behind the shelf. Perhaps it had been slipped into a book with the intention of being given and never quite handed over. The words themselves carried a simple, reassuring kindness, a small map for finding solace between pages. Next, she turned to a thicker piece of card, an old postcard. She saw its picture side worn smooth. The image, once vivid, had softened into muted shades. A riverside scene, trees arching over water that reflected a sky full of clouds. On the back, the message was brief but affectionate, inked in a looping, easy script. It mentioned the town by name, spoke of someone's happy surprise at discovering the loveliest little bookshop on a rainy afternoon, and promised to return one day with more time to browse. The stamp bore a date from more than a decade earlier. Elise traced the name of the sender with a fingertip, and then the name of the recipient, half familiar. Perhaps a resident who had moved away, or simply one she had seen on old library cards. The card felt like a tiny, sleeping echo of a day much like this one. Rain on the windows, pages turned slowly, someone finding a pocket of peace and wanting to share it with a distant friend. An envelope lay beneath the postcard, its flap open, its contents still inside. The paper carried a faint scent beneath the mustiness, something floral and very faint, perhaps violet or rosewater long faded. Elise slid the letter out and unfolded it, the creases soft and pliable from years of rest. This one was longer, several lines running into one another, but its mood was no less gentle. The writer spoke about a recipe shared with the woman who ran the bookshop on the corner where the street bends, about a tray of cinnamon biscuits exchanged for a stack of novels, about conversations at the counter while the rain tapped on the windows. There was mention of a child who liked to sit by the children's shelf and trace the pictures with a shy finger, of evenings spent reading aloud at the kitchen table. The letter closed with a promise to leave the recipe itself tucked in a favorite cookbook on the middle shelf so it will never be entirely lost. Elise felt a warm, soft thread run from her heart to that unknown kitchen, to the remembered biscuits, to the careful handwriting that had wanted to keep a small sweetness alive. She reached for another folded page, this one narrower, and unfolded it to find a drawing done in colored pencil. The lines were simple and earnest. A front window with books piled high, a door with a bell, and above it, a sign that looked very much like her own. The sky above was shaded in a pale, hopeful blue, and fine lines of slanted gray showed the rain falling softly around the shop. At the bottom, in uneven letters, a name was written, the first name of a child she remembered vaguely, a quiet boy who used to sit cross-legged on the braided rug, choosing picture books and looking at them in long, rapt silence. She imagined him now taller, perhaps far away. Yet this little drawing remained, tucked behind the shelves, a child's way of saying that the shop had felt like a safe place in the rainy world. The colors had faded, but not vanished. The small vision of a bright window in the rain still alive on the page. Among the remaining slips, she found one that made her pause a little longer. A short note written in a hand that looked almost hesitant, the letters slanting just slightly as if the writer had taken care but not quite trusted their own words. It did not name anyone directly, but the tone was unmistakable. Quiet admiration, a gentle confession of how much it had meant to share conversations about books with someone who worked here, how the sound of the bell above the door and the smell of the shop had become a kind of refuge during a difficult year. The note ended with a line that made her throat tighten with a tender ache. I hope, wherever you are when you read this again, the rain still sounds gentle and the pages still feel like home. Elise did not try to guess who the note had been meant for, whether it had ever reached its intended reader. It felt sufficient that it existed, that this soft expression of feeling had been left here, in trust to the quiet company of the books. Slowly, she spread all the papers out before her. The list of poems, the riverside postcard, the recipe letter, the child's drawing, the shy confession, and several smaller scraps, an old train ticket with their town's name, a torn corner of a shopping list that mentioned tea and candles, a tiny card with a single line of a poem copied in elegant script. Under the candle's warm light, they formed a small constellation of the town's hidden stories, a gentle tapestry of ordinary lives touched by this little room of paper and ink. Outside, the rain continued to fall in a quiet, peace-filled rhythm, wrapping the building in a soft, silver curtain. Inside, Elise felt as though she had opened a secret box of memories, each one modest yet luminous in its own way. She did not hurry to put them away. Instead, she stood for a while with her hands resting on the table's edge, letting the sense of connection seep through her like warm tea. These notes, these small, forgotten fragments, turned the shop into more than shelves and stories. They made it a place where the town had quietly brought its hopes, its gratitude, its small comforts, and shy affections. The walls seemed to hold those feelings the way the books held their words, preserving them in gentle stillness. As the candle flame wavered and steadied again, casting delicate shadows over the spread of paper, Elise felt a tranquil certainty that she was not alone here, even in the deep of a rainy night. The town itself seemed to breathe softly through these secret notes, and the bookshop, in its quiet, sheltered way, listened. For a time, Elise simply stood with the scattered papers before her, feeling their quiet presence, like a cluster of soft voices all speaking at once in a low, gentle murmur. The candlelight settled over the table in a calm, golden haze, turning the white and cream of the pages into warm ivory. Shadows of her hands, long and soft, lay beside the notes, and the rain at the windows kept up its peaceful song. It had eased a little now, the earlier steady drumming giving way to a lighter, more delicate tapping, as though the storm itself were growing drowsy. The air in the bookshop felt heavy with comfort, with the deep, quiet smell of paper and wax and tea, and Elise felt that if she moved too quickly, she might disturb something tender that had only just begun to breathe again. When she reached out at last, she did so with care, gathering the notes into smaller groups, not in any strict or tidy order, but according to a feeling that grew as she touched them. The list of poems and the card with the copied line of verse drew naturally together, like kin. The recipe letter and the mention of cinnamon biscuits seemed to belong beside the torn corner of the shopping list that named tea and candles. The drawing of the shop and the old train ticket, both marked with the town's name, nested well together, small proofs of movement and return. As she placed each scrap, each folded sheet, she noticed how certain names surfaced again and again, written in different hands, scattered across years. A surname on the postcard was echoed in the letter about biscuits. The child's first name appeared in the margin of another note, as if someone had written, quite simply, T likes the picture with the cat best. She leaned over the table, the candle's glow brushing her hair and the bridge of her nose, and gently traced one of those recurring names with her eyes. It felt as though she were following a silver thread through time, one that wound quietly from one slip of paper to another, weaving a soft pattern of connections. She did not need to know exactly who each person was, where they lived now, whether they still visited the shop or had gone on to other towns, other lives. It was enough to feel that they had been here, that their dreams and their quiet moments had passed through this room and left these small, delicate footprints behind. The notes were not grand declarations. They were modest, almost shy, yet, in their very modesty, they seemed to hold something enduring, a wish for comfort, a hope for company, a desire for gentle, peaceful things. She picked up the old train ticket, its edges worn, its ink faded to a soft, dusky blue. On the back, in hurried handwriting, someone had scribbled the name of a faraway city and the words "someday" with a red suitcase. The letters slanted upward, as if leaning toward that hoped-for day. Elise imagined the hand that had written them, perhaps while sitting on a bench in the small station outside town. Rain streaking the window, a train arriving with a little rush of steam and sound. Perhaps the writer had tucked the ticket into a book bought here, a novel about journeys and strange streets and new languages. Perhaps they had not gone yet, or perhaps they had left and returned, the red suitcase real or only dreamt. The ticket itself did not say, but the word "someday" rested on the cardboard like a small, glowing ember that time had not fully cooled. Beside it lay a longer letter, written on thin, lined paper. The top corner bore the month and year one from many seasons ago, and the salutation was simple: "Dear you." It told of night classes at the community college on the edge of town, of tired evenings brightened by an hour in the bookshop beforehand, drinking in the quiet as much as the pages. The writer spoke of wanting to keep learning until my thoughts feel bigger than the walls of my room, and of how certain books, recommended with a knowing smile at this very counter, had opened windows they had not known were there. One line said, "When I am too afraid to hope for much, I still hope for a good story and the sound of rain." And Elise felt that line sink deep into her, warm and achingly gentle. The letter ended with thanks, not for anything grand, but for the way the shop had been a soft, safe place to rest. It was signed with a first name she recognized faintly, a person she had once seen often and now only rarely, passed on the street with a nod. As Elise read and reread these fragments, she became aware of how many of them spoke, in one way or another, of dreams, small dreams, quiet dreams, dreams that did not shout or insist but curled themselves around the edges of everyday life. The dream of traveling someday with a red suitcase, the dream of learning something new, of letting the mind unfold like a flower in late spring, the dream of having a warm place to sit while the rain fell, of finding just the right poem for long evenings, of feeling seen and soothed in a room full of books. None of the notes talked of riches or fame, or anything sharp-edged. They spoke instead of gentler wishes, for time, for words, for companionship, for peaceful corners of light in which to breathe. She gathered the papers slowly into small, thoughtful stacks. One pile for recipes and kitchen thoughts, the biscuits and tea and soft bread that had passed between houses in the town. Another for journeys, real or imagined. The train ticket, the postcard from the riverside city, a scrap of an old timetable folded into a tiny square. A third for the notes of thanks and steady affection, those that mentioned the shop directly, its bell and its windows, the way it smelled in the rain. And a last pile for the bits of poetry and scribbled lines about evenings, moonlight, and quiet thoughts. As she formed each group, she felt she was arranging bundles of dreams that the town had once placed in her keeping without quite knowing it. The candle nearest her had burned low, its wax pooling in a small, glowing lake around the base of the wick. The flame itself was still strong but gentled, its movements slower, and its light seemed deeper, more golden. It cast a quiet halo over the stacks of paper, making the pages shine faintly, as though remembering starlight. Elise's eyes wandered toward the windows. Beyond the glass, the rain had thinned into a fine mist, drifting almost invisibly through the street lamp glow. The houses across the way were mostly dark now, their curtains drawn, their interiors turned inward toward sleep. Yet above the rooftops, the sky had lifted a little. The thickest clouds had drifted on, and in the gap they left, a pale, hesitant moon showed itself soft and silver, like a coin resting on velvet. Its light seeped through the thinning clouds and delicately touched the wet roofs and chimneys, turning every bead of water into a tiny, shining eye. The moonlight did not fully reach into the shop, but it joined with the candlelight at the edges of the windows, so that for a moment the reflections on the glass seemed doubled, golden within, silver without. Elise felt a quiet thrill at the sight, not of excitement, but of recognition, as if the world outside and the little world inside were gently acknowledging each other. The dreams held in these notes and letters, dreams of travel, of study, of peaceful evenings, belonged to both worlds at once, to the streets and houses and river beyond, and to this warm room of paper and ink. The moonlight, soft and distant, and the candlelight, near and warm, seemed to meet and agree that such dreams were worth keeping, even if they were never fully realized, even if they remained only in ink and memory. She turned back to the table and, after a moment's thought, slid one of the stacks, the journeys and some days, into the waiting pages of an old travel book whose spine had faded to a gentle sky blue. She placed the train ticket and the scribbled "someday" with a red suitcase between two chapters that described a slow river flowing through an unfamiliar city, thinking that perhaps whoever opened it next would feel a little stirring of that same quiet longing. The letters of thanks and affection she left together for now, smoothing them and aligning their edges, as if tucking them in. The recipes and scraps of lists she placed aside on a smaller pile, already imagining a future afternoon when she might try her hand at cinnamon biscuits while rain tapped softly on the kitchen window upstairs. The poetry scraps and the list of comforting verses she kept closest, right at the edge of the candle's glow. There was something in those lines that felt like a mirror to this very night, to the peaceful rhythm of the storm and the gentle hush of the books. She read again the note, suggesting poems, for when the evenings feel longer than they are, and smiled, recognizing herself among those imagined readers. These were letters that remembered dreams, not only for the ones who wrote them, but now for her as well. They reminded her of the small, soft wishes she carried quietly, the ones she rarely named, that the shop would always be a safe harbor, that there would always be kind stories to offer, that the rain would keep falling gently on the windows in years to come, and that people would go on finding solace here, even if she herself were only a memory stored in a corner of their minds. For a long while, she simply breathed with the room, with the notes, with the rain, letting the sense of continuity wrap around her like a gentle, woolen shawl. The town outside slept beneath its sheet of silvered clouds. The river beyond the streets flowed quietly through the darkness. The wind moved softly along the eaves, stirring a stray leaf or two. Inside the bookshop, the candles burned low and kind. The pages rested in their rows, and the little letters and scraps of paper, gathered and grouped, shone faintly with the dreams they had carried through the years. Elise laid her hand lightly over the nearest stack, as if in blessing, and felt, deep inside, a calm assurance that none of these quiet wishes were ever truly lost. They lived on in the gentle air, in the soft scent of paper, in the hush of the shelves, and in the peaceful heart of this small, sheltered room where the rain sang and the night was tender. When at last The little piles of letters and notes felt settled in their temporary places. Elise lifted her hand from the table and let her gaze wander slowly around the dim, golden room. The candles had burned lower, but their light was still soft and sure, touching the shelves and drifting gently over the worn boards of the floor. The rain outside had quieted into a hush so light it seemed more like a memory of rain than rain itself, a faint brushing sound against the eaves and the glass. Above the softened roofs of the town, the pale moon floated in a halo of thinning cloud, its silver glow drifting through the mist and settling lightly on the street. The bookshop, wrapped in this quiet and this gentle light, felt deeply at rest, and yet there was one part of it that called to her. Still, the small upstairs room that had waited all evening in its own private stillness, like an attic of dreams above the lamplight and rain. Elise moved through the aisles with unhurried steps, checking once more that the candles stood safely on their plates, that no loose paper lay too near the flames, that every window latch was set, and every curtain hung softly in place. She slipped the stack of letters that remembered dreams into a shallow wooden box on the counter, where they rested beneath a folded cloth, safe and quiet for another night. Then she reached for the narrow pull cord that hung beside the stairwell door and tugged gently. The door itself was simple, painted in a soft, muted cream, and when she opened it, the faint smell of old wood and linen drifted down the steep, shadowed steps. The glow from the shop spilled upward in a low, golden wedge, stopping halfway before thinning into darkness. She took one of the brass candle holders from the nearest table and lifted it carefully, shielding the flame with her palm as she stepped into the stairwell. The walls here were close and plain, the plaster tinged with the faint marks of years, and her footsteps on the wooden steps were soft and hollow, a muted thud that echoed gently upward. With each step, she moved away from the familiar rustle of pages and the scent of tea, and closer to the higher hush of the upper room where the roof met the sky. The rain was louder here. Though still gentle, she could hear it tapping on the tiles and on the small, single window at the far end of the attic landing. The sound was intimate, almost whispering, as if the sky had come nearer to speak in a softer voice. At the top of the stairs, she paused. The upstairs room opened out before her in a modest, sloping space with low beams and walls lined in part with pale, unfinished wood. It was not a large room, nor was it much visited. Its purpose for many years had been simple storage, a place where extra boxes of books and old display pieces waited in patient silence. Yet even in its disorder, there was a kind of quiet dignity. The wooden floorboards, though scuffed, shone faintly where the candlelight brushed them, and the boxes stacked along the walls formed small, squared-off hills in the dimness. The air smelled of dry cardboard, aging paper, and the faint, clean scent of cotton from the folded linens she kept in an old chest by the wall. Threading through it all was the soft, cool breath of the night air that seeped in around the edges of the window frame, carrying with it the pure smell of rain and distant leaves. She walked forward a few steps and set the candle on a small table that stood near the center of the room. Its surface scattered with a few old catalogs and a chipped porcelain dish that held a handful of mismatched buttons. The candle's light reached up to touch the ceiling beams, sending their shadows stretching softly down the walls. She could see, more clearly now, the outlines of the boxes pushed against the far side, some neatly labeled in her handwriting, spring titles, children's picture books, local history, and others marked in older, faded script from the days before she had taken over the shop. A small bookcase, rescued long ago from a neighbor's renovation, stood against one wall, its shelves holding an assortment of volumes that did not quite fit downstairs. First editions with fragile bindings, out-of-print poetry, a few foreign-language novels whose pages were foxed and delicate. They rested here in this upstairs quiet like a cluster of elder relatives, watching the years pass with gentle, patient eyes. The small window on the far wall drew her. Its glass was slightly wavy, the kind that turned the view outside into a soft, shimmering picture rather than a sharp scene. She crossed to it, her steps slow and soundless on the boards, and stood looking out. From up here, the town lay in a low, dark patchwork of roofs and chimneys, their lines softened by the film of recent rain. The street lamps shone in isolated pools, and the river, just visible in the distance, caught the moonlight in broken fragments, pieces of silver that moved and shifted with the current. The rain had eased to a fine, drifting mist that glowed faintly whenever it passed through the lamp halos, so that the air itself seemed full of tiny, floating specks of light. High above, the clouds had thinned enough that a few stars showed through, small and gentle, like pinpricks in a soft, dark curtain. The sight filled her with a deep, peaceful stillness. From this height, the world appeared both smaller and more tender, as if everything could be wrapped in a single, quiet gesture. The bookshop below, with its candles and shelves, was only one building among many. Yet she knew that inside it, the air was rich with stories and with the secret notes she had just read. Up here, in the upstairs room, those stories felt as though they had floated upward and settled in the beams and corners, forming a kind of invisible canopy. Elise rested her fingertips against the cool glass of the window for a moment, feeling the faint vibration of the rain's last light taps, then turned back toward the room with the gentle resolve of someone about to make a welcoming space. She moved first to the old armchair that sat slightly off to one side, near the little bookcase. It had come from her parents' house years ago, its upholstery a soft, faded pattern of leaves in moss and cream. The springs sagged a little, but its arms were smooth and comforting, worn by decades of resting hands. Elise straightened the cushion, plumping it with a careful shake, and brushed a light film of dust from the back. Beside the chair stood a small table with a narrow drawer and a top just wide enough for a book and a teacup. She wiped its surface with the sleeve of her cardigan, then pulled it a little closer to the chair so that anyone sitting there would have an easy reach. It took only a few simple adjustments, but when she stepped back, the arrangement already suggested a nest-like corner, a place for someone to sink into and be held by softness and quiet. At the foot of the chair, folded over a low wooden chest, lay a woolen blanket in a deep, sleepy blue. Elise lifted it, shaking it out gently. The blanket exhaled a faint, clean scent from the last time she had hung it in the pale spring sun to air, mixed now with the familiar smell of the room. The wool was thick but not heavy, with a slightly rough, reassuring texture. She draped it over the back of the chair and let one corner fall down along the arm, ready to be pulled across one's knees on a cooler night. The arrangement pleased her. The chair, the blanket, the table, the low candle on the central table spreading its light just far enough to brush the edges of this little nook. A soft place in a quiet room, high above the sleeping town, with the rain on the roof and the moon outside the window. Only then did she turn her attention to the boxes of books. She started with a stack labeled in her own clear handwriting from a few years before, sliding the top one forward and easing it open. The cardboard flaps gave way with a gentle crackle, and the smell of enclosed paper and print rose up like a deep, slow breath. Inside lay neat rows of hardcovers, their dust jackets crisp and their titles gleaming. These were not the oldest volumes. They had simply not yet found their way downstairs, waiting patiently for their turn on the lower shelves. She lifted a few out, weighing them in her hands, and chose one with a landscape on its cover, a river winding through hills under a wide, soft sky. It felt like the right kind of story to live in this upstairs room of sleeping books. From another box, she drew out something older, a collection of fairy tales with gilt edging that had dulled to a soft, warm brass, and a cloth binding that showed the slightest fraying at the corners. The pages, when she let them fall open, had that particular, gentle crackle of well-made paper that had aged with grace. The illustrations, printed in fine black lines, showed forests and stars and small cottages with curling smoke rising into the sky. She imagined how the candlelight would catch those lines, how the images would glow softly against the creamy paper when the rest of the room was dim and quiet. She set this book aside on the little table by the armchair, first in a small stack she intended to grow. A few chosen volumes to keep close in this nook, ready to be opened on any peaceful night when the rain came and the world felt far away. Book by book, she worked through a few more boxes, not with the urgency of someone completing a task, but with the slow, searching pleasure of someone listening for a particular tone. She chose a slim book of poems about rivers and gardens, its cover a simple, pale green, a worn biography of a composer whose music she sometimes played quietly on the record player downstairs. A small, dark blue volume of letters from one writer to another, their inked thoughts about words and time and weather preserved on delicate pages. Each selection she added to the growing little pile beside the chair, creating a tiny, private library within the larger one. The rest of the books she left nestled in their boxes for now, content to let them sleep a little longer in their cardboard beds. When she was done, the upstairs room felt subtly changed. Though no walls had moved and no new furniture had appeared, it was in the way the armchair sat with its blanket, the way the chosen books waited on the small table, the way the candle's light pooled in a softer circle near that corner and brushed faintly over the lower shelf of the old bookcase. The room seemed to breathe more deeply, as if it had been given a purpose beyond storage, a gentle invitation to rest and dream. The rain on the roof was a light patter now, barely more than a murmur, and through the small window the moon shone more strongly, its silver glow painting the edges of the clouds and touching the river in the distance with a slow, wandering brightness. Elise crossed to the chair and lowered herself into it, feeling the springs give way in a familiar, comforting dip. The wool blanket brushed her arm, and she drew a small corner of it into her lap without thinking, savoring its warmth. The candle on the central table flickered as a faint breath of night air slipped under the door or through some crack in the frame, and its light danced softly on the beams above her. From downstairs came the faintest echo of the ticking clock and the deeper silence of the resting shelves. Up here, those sounds seemed farther away, softened and wrapped in the hush of the attic room. She picked up the fairy tale book, not to read at length, but to open it just enough that the candle's flame could touch the pages. The paper glowed delicately, and the little black line drawing of a cottage under stars shimmered momentarily, as if the night outside had leaned in to greet it. She closed the book again after a few quiet breaths and simply sat, listening. The wind moved softly around the roof, stirring a loose shingle, whispering around the chimney pots. The rain, now only a fine silver drift, brushed the glass with the lightest of touches. From somewhere beyond the town came the faint, distant call of a night train passing along its tracks, a low, steady sound that rose and fell like a sigh in the dark. All of it together made a music of its own, gentle, soft, peaceful, like a lullaby woven from water and wood and star-pale sky. The upstairs room, with its sleeping books and its small, welcoming chair, felt like the very heart of that lullaby. Wrapped in its quiet, Elise let her eyes close for a moment, not to sleep, but to rest in the sweetness of feeling sheltered and at home, high above the silver-dusted roofs, in a room full of softly dreaming pages. After a while, the stillness of the upstairs room settled over Elise like a soft cloak, and she felt a gentle pull to return to the world below, to the familiar drift of lamplight and shelves, and the quiet company of the front window. She opened her eyes slowly, as if rising from a light, pleasant doze, and listened once more to the soft patter of rain on the roof and the faint hum of the town beyond. The candle on the small table near the armchair had burned down a little, its flame smaller but still steady, casting a warm, oval glow over the stack of chosen books. Elise rested her hand for a moment on the back of the chair, as if thanking it for its patient comfort, then rose with unhurried movements, the blanket brushing lightly against her skirt as she stood. She took up the brass candle holder again, shielding the flame with her palm, and stepped toward the stairwell, leaving the upstairs collection of sleeping books to their gentle dreams beneath the sloping roof and the silver-washed sky. The descent was as soft as her climb had been. Each step down carried with it both the scent of the attic and the faint, rising fragrance of the shop below. Paper, wax, and the last traces of cooled tea. The candle's light glided over the stairwell walls in long, slow shapes, and the murmur of the rain grew muffled again, filtered now through the ceiling and the shelves. When she reached the bottom and opened the door back into the main room, the sight that greeted her felt like returning to a familiar harbor. The candles she had left burning still glowed with calm, steady flames, their small lakes of wax deepened but contained. The notes and letters in the shallow box on the counter slumbered beneath their folded cloth. The aisles were quiet, the books standing in patient ranks, the air holding its soft mixture of ink, dust, and something almost floral from the faint memory of pressed flowers between old pages. She set the candle holder back on a side table and stood for a moment, listening to the different layers of sound. The rain on the windows now was gentle, a fine, even tapping like fingertips on glass. Somewhere in the building, a faint draft whispered, stirring the corner of a curtain and making a shadow on the wall breathe slightly. The clock on its hook kept its modest, measured tick, each second a small, reassuring footstep through the night. Elise felt all of this settle into her bones as a kind of peaceful rhythm, slow and sure, like a heartbeat at rest. Her gaze drifted naturally to the front of the shop, where the windows stood as darkened panels of moving silver. She knew, without looking closely, that the street outside would be shining. The rainwater gathered in shallow flows and puddles, the lamps along the pavement reflected in long, wavering lines. The thought drew her gently, as it always did on rainy nights, toward her favorite place to sit, the little chair near the front glass, between the display table and the low shelf of novels that often became her companions after closing. Before she went to the window, she paused by that lower shelf and let her fingers brush along the spines, listening for the slight, private tug of one book more than the others. Her hand came to rest on a familiar volume, its cloth cover soft and faded, its title pressed in modest gold that caught the candlelight in a quiet gleam. It was a story she had read before more than once, in fact, but that made it all the more suitable for this kind of night. There was comfort in knowing the shape of the tale ahead, in recognizing certain sentences like old friends, in letting her mind wander gently without the urgency to discover what came next. She slid the book from its place, feeling the weight of it in her hand, smelling the deep, warm scent that rose from its pages as they shifted faintly against one another. With the book tucked against her chest, she moved to the wooden chair near the front window, its seat polished by years of occasional use, and settled into it with the ease of someone slipping into a familiar dream. The glass before her was a dark mirror threaded with silver. The street outside lay like a quiet, shining river. The rainwater spread thinly over the pavement so that every light along its length became a stretch of soft, wavering brightness. The street lamps rose like slender, patient trees on either side, their reflections in the wet surface reaching down as if to touch some clear, hidden current below. A parked car here, a bicycle there, a row of shuttered shop fronts, all of them melted into the shining, rippling image on the street, as if the town itself were leaning over a flowing ribbon of water. The few drops still falling from eaves and gutters made tiny circles and puddles, each small ring widening and overlapping, like whispered sentences spoken in the language of water. Elise watched for a while, the book resting unopened in her lap, and imagined that if she stepped outside and stood at the very edge of that shining road, she might see not asphalt, but a slow, gentle river drifting its silver way through the sleeping town. At last, she opened the book. The familiar creak of the spine greeted her like an old, kind voice. The candle behind her lent the pages a soft luster, turning the creamy paper into a quiet, luminous surface on which the words lay in dark, even lines. The glow from the street lamps tinted the edges of the paper with the faint palest of gold, while the light from the moon, glimpsed in the upper corner of the far window, added a whisper of cool silver. Elise read slowly, her eyes moving unhurriedly across each sentence, allowing the rhythms of the prose to blend seamlessly with the steady beat of the rain. Every few moments, she turned a page, and the sound was soft and intimate, a gentle rustle like leaves stirred by a mild night breeze. With each new sheet, the deep scent of paper and ink rose again, familiar and soothing, carrying with it the faintest traces of other nights when she had sat in this very spot, listening to the same kind of storm. The story spoke of a journey along a river, of quiet villages and willow trees leaning over the water, of evening skies turning from blue to violet, while the current flowed on. As she read, the world on the page and the world beyond the glass began to slip toward each other, both bathed in soft, watery light. She saw, in her mind's eye, a narrow boat drifting along under low branches, lanterns glowing on its small deck, while stars slowly appeared overhead. She could almost hear the gentle lap of water against the hull, a sound that merged with the gentle tapping of rain on the window pane. The bookshop around her fell away in stages, not disappearing, but becoming a kind of safe harbor at the river's edge. The shelves were tall trees on the bank, the narrow aisles winding paths through quiet groves, the wooden floor a series of worn, sun-warmed planks on a weathered dock, and the books themselves, closed and waiting, felt like moored boats, each holding its own secret voyage inside. Through the window, the reflections deepened. Candlelight from within and streetlight from without met and mingled on the glass, so that Elise saw both the wet, shining road and the rows of books overlaid upon one another like two images in a dream. Her own face, softened by the low light, floated faintly in the surface, framed by the blurred outlines of the shelves behind her and the silver gleam of the street beyond. It was as if she were sitting at the boundary between two gentle worlds, one of paper and ink, and the sweet, dry scent of aging pages, and one of water and stone, and the cool breath of the rain-washed night. The glass between them was not harsh or cold. It felt almost like a veil, thin and tender, through which the two worlds exchanged light. Inside, the candles breathed golden warmth. Outside, the moon and the lamps poured quiet silver over the rain-dark ground. She let the book rest open in her hand and lifted her eyes to the sky visible at the top of the window pane. The clouds had parted more fully now, leaving a long, soft channel of darker blue across which stars were beginning to appear, shy and small, but unmistakably bright. The moon had risen a little higher, its pale face clearer, its light flowing like milk across the damp rooftops and chimney stacks. A thin breeze moved along the street, stirring the shop's hanging sign so that it gave a small, creaking turn, and the faint shadow of its motion rippled across the inside of the glass. Somewhere nearby, a few leaves, still clinging to a street tree, shivered and whispered together as the air touched them. The rain had become so light that it seemed less like falling drops and more like a cool, drifting presence, a silver breath moving through the night. On the windowsill, there stood a small pot of greenery, a humble plant she had brought from home one spring and never quite taken back. Its leaves, dark and glossy, leaned calmly toward the glass. Tiny beads of moisture had gathered on the outer panes where the mist had brushed past, and through them, the blurred outlines of the leaves looked as if they were underwater, part of the slow, silver river she had imagined. The plant's faint scent, something quiet and green, mingled with the richer smell of paper and wax, adding a hint of garden air to the room. Elise smiled at it, at its patient resilience in the shifting seasons, and thought of all the flowers blooming unseen in the darkness beyond the small gardens behind houses, the wildflowers along the riverbank, the climbing roses resting their petals under the moon's gentle gaze. Even in the deepest night, the world breathed with soft life, just as the shelves here breathed softly with stories. Turning back to the book, she read another page or two, letting the river in the story carry her thoughts downstream, past sleepy cottages and lamplit bridges, past reeds and waterbirds and drifting clusters of fallen petals. Each sentence seemed to float slowly past, like a small boat pushed by a mild current. Her eyelids grew ever so slightly heavier, not with exhaustion, but with the pleasant weight of contentment, as if the night itself were leaning close, inviting her to rest. The combination of the book's familiar cadences, the quiet murmur of the rain, and the distant glimmer of the real river beyond the town wrapped around her in a calm, silver-tinged haze. She shifted in her chair, drawing her cardigan a little closer around her shoulders, and breathed in deeply, filling her lungs with the soft scent of paper and night-cooled air. At last, when the candle on the side table had burned low enough that its flame grew smaller and more introspective, Elise slipped a hand between the pages of the book to hold her place and closed it gently. The covers met with a muted, cozy sound, and she rested her palm on them for a moment, as if thanking the story for its company. The street outside was quieter than ever, the shining river of rainwater thinning into slender threads that glowed faintly under the lamps. The reflections on the glass dimmed and deepened, but they still held traces of gold and silver, like the last glimmer of daylight in a long, peaceful dusk. Sitting there in the half-light, with the closed book warm beneath her hand and the quiet world beyond the window, Elise felt entirely sheltered, as though she were seated on the bank of a gentle, dreamlike river that flowed not only through the town, but through every book on her shelves, carrying stories, wishes, and quiet hopes onward under the watchful, tender eye of the moon. For a long, easy moment, Elise remained in the chair by the window, her hand resting on the closed book and her gaze drifting over the softened reflections in the glass. The street outside lay quiet and pale, its earlier sheen of rainwater now thinning to scattered patches of damp that caught the lamplight in subdued glimmers. The air carried that special stillness that comes after a storm, when everything seems washed and hushed, as if the town itself were taking a deep, peaceful breath. She watched a thin trickle of water slide along the gutter, shining like a small, silver thread as it made its way down toward the unseen river, and felt a matching sense of gentle movement inside herself, a quiet readiness to rise, to move slowly through the shop and prepare it for the soft light of morning that would come a few hours from now. She lifted her hand from the book and laid it in her lap, feeling the warmth it had left in her palm fade into the coolness of the evening air. Then, with the ease of someone long accustomed to this hour, she stood and smoothed the front of her skirt, the wooden chair creaking softly as it released her weight. The candles around the room still burned, though some had grown lower, their flames smaller yet no less calm. Their mellow light touched the shelves and the floorboards, gathered in quiet pools under tables and along the edges of the counter. Elise slipped the book under her arm, holding it close for a moment, and then returned it to its place on the lower shelf, sliding it gently back between its two neighbors until their spines sat in neat, familiar alignment. The simple act felt like tucking a friend into bed. From there, she began her slow, practiced circuit of the shop, the one that marked the transition between evening and night and the coming day. The display table near the door, which had been merely straightened before, now called for more thoughtful attention. She moved to it, her fingertips gliding lightly over its surface as she surveyed the rows of books arranged with their covers facing outward. Some had been turned askew by curious hands during the day. Others had lost their careful spacing. In the gentle glow of candlelight, the images on their covers looked softer, their colors deepened, the titles subdued. Elise selected a small cluster of books that felt right for tomorrow's front display stories, with calm landscapes on their jackets, collections of letters, quiet novels with titles that spoke of gardens, rivers, and gentle seasons. One by one, she arranged them in a loose, inviting pattern, letting some stand upright and others lie in small, overlapping stacks. She took an older volume of poems from the nearby shelf and laid it at the center, slightly forward, as if it had something tender and steady to say before all the rest. She stepped back to look, tilting her head just a little, and felt a quiet satisfaction at the sight. The table now suggested a calm, welcoming mood, a soft promise to the first person who would step in tomorrow, shaking rain or sun from their coat, that this was a place where the world moved at the pace of turning pages. The vase on the corner of the counter caught her eye next a simple glass cylinder she kept for the occasional branch or flower. Early in the week, she had placed in it a stem of greenery from a shrub outside her building, and now its leaves had begun to droop, their once bright edges dulled by time indoors. She carried the vase to the small basin in the back and emptied it, the old water slipping away in a smooth, quiet pour. Then she rinsed the glass, listening to the gentle splash and feeling the coolness on her fingers, before filling it anew with fresh water that glinted in the candlelight. She set the vase aside, intending to gather a new sprig of leaves, or perhaps a small cluster of flowers in the morning, when the early air would still be soft and damp from the night. It comforted her to imagine a few fresh leaves, perhaps pale green or deep and glossy, rising from the water under the front window's light, catching the sun as it moved slowly across the sky. Returning to the center of the room, she looked down the aisles, letting her gaze rest briefly on each section. The shelves stood steady, but here and there, a book leaned at an angle sharper than she liked, or a gap yawned a little wider than the rest. She slipped into the nearest aisle and began to adjust what needed adjusting, her movements unhurried and sure. A volume of history was nudged back into place. A thin paperback, nearly swallowed by its taller neighbors, was brought forward so its title could be seen. In the children's corner, she bent to straighten a scatter of small picture books, smoothing their covers and stacking them in a gentle, friendly pile on the low table. The braided rug beside it was slightly askew, so she tugged it straight, imagining the small, sleepy feet that might settle there tomorrow for a story. As she worked, the memories of the evening's discoveries, the notes, the drawings, the lists, and letters wandered softly through her mind. She thought of the little box on the counter where the letters that remembered dreams now rested, and felt a quiet desire to give them a home more clearly named. When the shelves and tables had reached the harmony she sought, she returned to the counter and drew the box toward her. The cloth folded over the papers felt cool and slightly textured beneath her fingertips. She lifted it, revealing the neatly stacked scraps and sheets within, their edges uneven, their tones ranging from pale cream to honeyed yellow. For a moment, she simply looked at them. A small, tender weight of the town's stories gathered into one place. On a lower shelf behind the counter, there was an empty space where she had long meant to place a more formal box, a wooden one she had purchased at a flea market and never quite put to use. She drew it out now, brushing off a faint film of dust. It was smooth and dark, its lid hinged, a simple brass clasp at the front. It felt right in her hands, solid and quiet. She opened it, and one by one, transferred the notes from the shallow temporary box into this more lasting home. Each piece of paper made a soft, whispering sound as it slid into place. When she had finished, she closed the lid gently and reached for a small scrap of cardstock and a pencil. In her clear, careful hand, she wrote 2 simple words: "Found treasures." She set the label beneath the box on the shelf, where she would see it each time she reached for the wrapping paper or the notebook where she kept her orders. The words looked right modest, almost shy, yet full of affection. With that done, she turned to check the lamps and candles once more. 2 of the candles had burned very low, their wax nearly used. She cupped her hand around the first and blew with the lightest breath. The flame bent, trembled, then dwindled into a thin thread of smoke that rose and curled in the air, carrying with it a faint, sweet scent of extinguished wax and warm wick. She watched the smoke unravel and vanish. The sudden small darkness where the light had been making the nearby shelves seem deeper and more restful. She moved to the second candle and did the same, grateful for the way the remaining flames still held the room in a gentle glow. It was important not to leave the shop in complete darkness too soon. She liked to close up slowly, as though dimming the light of a stage after a play, letting each moment find its quiet end. At the front windows, she checked the latches and smoothed the curtain folds, leaving just a narrow gap at one side where the street lamp's soft light could slip in. The sign still hung with its closed side facing outward. She touched the edge of it lightly, feeling the coolness of the glass beneath her fingertips. Outside, the air had a newly washed clarity, and when she leaned closer, she could see a faint mist rising from the road where the heat of the day still lingered in the stones. The river beyond, though hidden from sight, seemed to make itself known in the way the breeze moved cool, steady, carrying a hint of water and far-off leaves. Above the rooftops, the moon now stood higher, its silver light gentler and more diffused, and a few more stars had emerged, quiet points of brightness in the softened sky. She returned to the center of the room and stood for a moment in stillness, letting her eyes travel slowly from shelf to shelf, from corner to corner. The displays were tidy, but not stiff. The aisles were clear, ready for morning footsteps. The chairs sat in their places, waiting for browsers to rest. The air held the last traces of the day's warmth, mingled with the cool breath of the night and the steady, comforting scent of paper. The bookshop felt not empty, but expectant, as though it were a gentle living thing that had curled up to sleep, already dreaming of the next day's conversations and quiet discoveries. On a small impulse, she went to the door and turned the key just enough to test the lock, reassured by its firm, soft resistance. The bell above the frame stirred slightly as the door moved a fraction of an inch and then settled again, its metal tongue touching the side with the faintest of chimes, like a tiny, sleepy yawn. She smiled and let the key rest back against the wood. There was nothing outside that pressed against these walls with any urgency now. The town itself seemed to be wrapped in the same kind, slow quiet that filled the shop. She listened for a moment longer to the gentle sounds the clock tick, the distant hush of the river, the hardly there stroke of the breeze against the windows, then turned toward the small staircase that led up to her own rooms above. Before she left the main floor, she reached out and brushed her fingertips lightly along the nearest row of spines, a small, affectionate gesture of good night. The books stood silent, but in their silence there was a sense of soft companionship, as if they understood that for now they would rest, holding their words close like folded wings. The remaining candles cast their calm, steady light, silvered by the hints of moonlight slipping through the curtain gap. The whole room seemed to breathe in one long, peaceful sigh. Elise took a last look around, letting the sight of the tidy tables, the waiting chairs, the shelves in gentle order settle into her mind. Then, carrying the quiet with her, she stepped toward the stairs, ready to leave the shop in its soft, sheltered darkness and prepare herself too for the deep, restful night that was drawing near. Elise had taken only a few steps toward the stairs when a familiar, gentle reluctance slowed her feet. It happened almost every night, this soft pause before she finally left the main floor. She could no more skip it than she could skip the turning of the sign in the window. There was something in her that wanted to linger just a little longer among the shelves, to be sure that the quiet was as peaceful as it seemed, that the books were settled, that the night had truly laid its calm hand over every corner. She turned back from the stairwell and stood in the center of the room for a moment, listening. The faint, even ticking of the clock, the almost inaudible brush of the breeze along the roof, the distant silver murmur of the river. Everything lay in the same soft harmony. Still, she felt the small, affectionate need to say goodnight. She began her final walk through the shop, a slow, unhurried path that took her down the central aisle and then along the outer edges, tracing a gentle rectangle through the room. At each shelf, at each familiar section, she let her hand drift lightly over the spines. It was not a tidy check now that work had already been done, but a quiet, wordless farewell to the day. In the fiction section, her fingertips brushed past the stories that had been taken up and set down, chosen and carried away, or left waiting for tomorrow. In the children's corner, she paused by the braided rug and the low table, imagining small hands reaching in the morning for bright covers and friendly illustrations. The rug lay smooth and ready, its colors muted in the candlelight, and the little chairs stood neatly in a row, like patient friends waiting for laughter to return. At the back wall, where the biographies and histories kept their steady company, she stopped and simply breathed. The candle nearest this corner threw out a small, clear light, and the titles on the spines shone faintly in its glow. Names and years and places lined up in orderly succession. She thought of all the lives held quietly there, all the journeys and struggles and quiet moments of joy preserved in careful paragraphs. Even the thick silence of the closed books felt kind, as if each story understood that now was a time for rest, not for recounting. On a small impulse, she drew out one volume at random, opened it for a heartbeat to the middle, inhaled the deep, calm scent of its pages, and then closed it again with a soft tap. "Sleep well," she murmured under her breath, not to the book alone, but to everything it represented, to all the words and days it held. She passed by the spot where the ladder stood, resting once more against the tall shelf from which she had drawn the hidden notes earlier in the evening. The ladder's wooden rungs cast long, slender shadows across the boards, and in the modest circle of candlelight, it looked almost like the trunk of a pale tree leaning gently against a hillside of books. She remembered how it had felt to stand high above, looking down at the shop from that quiet height, and how the rain had sounded closer, more insistent. Now the rain was barely there at all, just an occasional faint patter and a whisper on the glass, as though the storm had been lulled into its own peaceful sleep. Somewhere behind the shelves, the little hollow that had held the secret papers now lay empty, its treasures gathered and given a new home. The thought soothed her. Nothing precious was lost, only moved into clearer keeping. When she reached the front of the shop again, she paused by the window, drawn as ever to the soft, silvered view beyond the glass. The street, washed clean by the earlier rain, lay in gentle stillness, its patches of dampness dull now rather than bright, like satin that had cooled. A thin mist hovered over the darker stretch where the road dipped, breathing very faintly with the night breeze. Street lamps stood in their regular intervals, glowing less fiercely than before, their light softened by the rising damp and the slowly drifting air. Above the roofs opposite, the sky had opened just enough to show a cluster of stars gathered near the now higher, quieter moon. The moonlight was not sharp. It was mild and diffused, spreading a soft silver over chimneys and telephone wires, touching the river in the distance with a faint, wavering brightness. Elise stood close enough that her breath clouded the glass for a moment, leaving a delicate, foggy patch that faded as soon as it formed. The shop's interior, reflected faintly, laid itself over the outside scene, so that for a few instants the shelves and the stars, the books and the rooftop chimneys all seemed to share the same space. It gave her the pleasant sense that the boundaries between inside and outside, between night and story, were thinner than they appeared, that the gentle, quiet world of the bookshop could reach out, in its own small way, to the sleeping town, and that the silver, peaceful sky could lean in to bless the shelves and tables with its soft attention. She placed her hand flat against the glass, feeling its cool firmness against her palm, and let that feeling anchor her in the present moment. Here, in this rainy night world of paper, moonlight, and quiet air, turning away at last, she moved back toward the counter, where the final candles waited. Their flames were still steady, but their wax had burned down far enough that a small tilt in the air caused them to tremble, as if they too were growing drowsy. On the lower shelf behind the counter, the wooden box marked "Found Treasures" sat in its new place, the little label resting below it. She touched the top of the box lightly, thinking of the train ticket with its dream of a red suitcase, the drawing of the shop under the rain, the recipes and notes and quiet thanks. They belonged to the town, yet they belonged here, too, in this room that had listened as people came and went, speaking their dreams aloud or leaving them folded on paper. In the soft silence, she felt that the box held not only the past, but something gentle reaching forward, a reminder that tender, hopeful words would continue to find their way into books and corners and hearts. She lifted the candle from the counter and carried it a few steps toward the center of the room, letting its light spill across the nearest shelves one last time. The shadows lengthened, then drew together as she stood still. She thought of the people who would come tomorrow, the elderly man who favored mysteries and always apologized when he stayed too long, the young woman who carried a notebook dotted with song lyrics and often asked for poetry, the school children who came with coins clutched tightly in their warm hands, hoping to buy something of their very own. She thought of others she did not know by name, who might one day push open the door on a rainy afternoon, drawn only by the smell of paper or the promise of quiet. In her mind, she saw them all stepping into this gentle light, finding on some shelf the very words they needed, even if they did not yet know they were looking. A feeling rose in her then, soft and steady, like water filling a still pool. A wish, not sharp or urgent, but broad and kindly. It was for them, of course, the readers and wanderers and quiet souls of the town. But as it formed, it seemed to reach further, out beyond these streets and this river, toward anyone who might, in some other place, be listening to a story in the dark, feeling the slow weight of sleep begin to settle. She wanted the shop's calm to stretch toward them too, to offer them the sense of being safe and sheltered, held in a gentle, watchful embrace while the night moved softly past. It was a feeling she could not wrap in many words, so she let it hover just beneath her voice as she breathed in and out, with the steady rhythm of the clock, the faint murmur of the river, the almost silent brush of the breeze. At last, she cupped her hand around the candle's flame and blew. The light dimmed to a small, glowing coal before giving way to a slender ribbon of smoke that rose into the air, curling and fading in the darkness above. The room shifted into a deeper shade, the remaining candlelight at the far side of the shop now the only glow. She crossed to it and stood for a moment, letting it warm her fingertips. Around her, the shelves fell into a velvety dusk, their outlines still visible, their details softened. She thought of them as resting. Every book, a sleeping creature curled around its story, every page a folded wing, awaiting the soft touch of morning light or the turning hand of a new reader. Then, with the same gentle care, She leaned close and breathed out the final flame. Darkness descended not suddenly, but like a quiet curtain, revealing the faint silver outlines of the windows and the soft square of light that framed the staircase to her apartment above. She did not fumble in the gloom. She knew the room so well that her steps were sure and easy. As she moved toward the stairs, the smell of extinguished candles and paper rose around her in a deep, comforting wave. The whisper of the wind at the windows, the distant, watery murmur of the river, and the soft ticking of the clock remained, now sounding even more peaceful in the absence of light. She paused at the foot of the stairs and turned back one final time, though she could see only dim shapes and the faint silver wash of moonlight on the front glass. She felt the presence of the shop like a kind, drowsy friend at her back. In the quiet of her own thoughts, she offered a small, silent blessing to the room, to the books, to the night, and beyond them all, to anyone who needed a gentle, sheltered place in their dreams. May this night be soft for you, she thought, letting the words drift outward like the slow exhale of a sigh. May the dark be kind and the quiet deep. May the sound of rain, if it comes, be no more than a peaceful whisper at your window. May silver moonlight touch your sleep like a gentle hand, and may your dreams be filled with calm rivers, friendly stars, and pages that turn without hurry. May you feel safe and warm and watched over, as if you rested in a small, quiet bookshop while the world outside falls softly into silence. The wish settled around her like a warm shawl, and she knew, in the simple, steady way of someone who trusts such things, that it would linger in the air long after she had gone upstairs. With that, Elise turned and climbed the steps, the faint glow from the landing above guiding her upward. Behind her, the bookshop lay wrapped in its own gentle darkness, filled with the scent of paper and the memory of rain, its shelves rising like quiet trees beneath a sky of wooden beams. Outside, the moon sailed slowly over the rooftops, and the river slipped past in a low, silver murmur. And somewhere beyond the walls, beyond the town, beyond the windows of countless rooms, those who listened to this story, or one like it, felt their breathing grow slower and their limbs grow heavy as sleep, soft and peaceful, came to claim them. The night held them all, like a kind hand cupped around a candle's flame, and in that tender holding, the world grew still, and the dreams began, gentle and deep.